What should be hit before Worlds? We are about 2 months off from the BCS 24-25 World Finals, and there are a lot of things in both formats that need to be hit. So let's talk about my opinions on what cards should be restricted so that Worlds is a better format. So there's obviously, takes from Solemn, takes from Kai as well, and these are my own personal takes on, I guess, what cards should be restricted for each format. So before we do, let's kind of talk about the criteria for Bushiroad when they are restricting cards. So it needs to kind of follow one or more of these categories. So the first one is that a card is restricted if it reduces the variety of clans and nations used in a tournament, right? So if there's a tier 0 deck, probably ban it, and it just kind of falls under that category. Secondly, if a card lengthens time needed for a game. So if a game drags on for too long, that card probably needs to be assessed. The third one is that it greatly affects the future development of cards. And, as standard rolls out, there's more Stride deck sets, then it affects premium as well. So, cards are restricted with that in mind as well. And then the fourth one, if a card presents, an unfun experience or I guess an unpleasant encounter where, there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff in between, the complex stuff in between, and a card is not designed with the design intention in mind, then it probably falls under that too. And then ultimately, you look at the holistic thing, try to keep restrictions to a minimum. So let's talk about standard. So standard at the moment is full of Leverdress, full of Rezael, and looking at the JP format, there's a lot above Sagra, a lot of new decks coming out, and set 6 also presents Messiah too. So I think as new sets come along, the power creep, increases the power level of the game, which is fine, right? So what you see now might not be what you see, come set 8, set 9, and that's just kind of how power creep works, yeah? But in terms of usability and the gameplay of standard, there is one deck that makes this format very unenjoyable, and that is Enlargulv. So Enlargulv has a card in the deck that is called Lightning Heat Monster Moflash, and essentially the category that this card falls under are it will greatly affect the future card developments for Enlargulv, and it presents an unfun experience. So why is that? So this card essentially allows Enlargulv, when they go first, to essentially restand their Vanguard and restand their rearguard multiple times because of the amount of orders that it sets into the order zone. So Moflash accelerates orders into the order zone multiple times, during the turn. More Moflash means more orders, and it offers a one-turn kill, essentially. And it's very unfun. You're going second, you're on grade 2, you have 7-8 card hand, and how are you guarding a Vanguard and a rearguard that each have crit, right? If your opponent checks crit, then you're kind of screwed. So it's not very fun. And then going second as Enlargulv doesn't really care, right? Because standard at the moment just doesn't have the defensive mechanics to be able to guard through multiple loops of restand. And essentially the deck, I think, in total can get 7 or 8 attacks that is ridiculously big. And then, yeah, just cripples your opponent into a position where it's irrecoverable, and then they just win on the next turn. So this card is a big problem because it boosts the consistency of the deck performing well, especially if it goes first. And even if it goes second, it just farms a bunch of hand and, it stabilizes, right? Or it puts your opponent in a position where there's just no way of coming back. And this particular card, if it forever exists in Enlargulv, which it probably will, right? Probably not at 4 copies, essentially. We want future Enlargulv cards to be better, right? How is any other new Enlargulv card going to be better than this and serves a better role than this card? It's just not possible. One of the comments was this card is a 2028 card that got released in 2025. So it's ridiculously high power scale, right? So I think Moflash should go to 1. Going into 1 means that you still can play Enlargulv with this card and not completely restricting the card from being used in the deck. But it means that, the consistency of the deck gets like shot through the roof down to the floor, right? And you know, it means that other players will actually have to venture out of Enlargulv and not play like a super high roll deck, right? So I think Mo Flash to 1 is considerate. I don't think banning it is ideal because it means that the design flaws in this card are quite evident. I mean, it is evident, but you know, I think restricting it to 1, you know, people will still play the deck. So yeah, that is for standard. So let's talk about premium. So premium at the moment, there is a lot of talks on how degenerate this format is and how high roll it is really. So when we're talking about the premium hits, I'm gonna break it down into 2 phases. So the first phase being the primary hits, the mandatory hits that need to happen for the format. And then the second one, phase 2, will be complementary hits, like, you know, the preemptive hits for the decks that, you know, exist after these primary hits. So let's talk about phase 1. So in premium at the moment, there are these things called Crest grade 1s, and Crest grade 1s are entirely designed for standard in mind, right? You ride this from your ride deck, you get your Crest, and then as the game progresses, you're flipping 2 because of your strides. If you're going into a, you know, a special stride like, you know, Drag Stride or Luard, or, you know, Dragon Masquerade Harry, then you don't flip, but you get the trade-off of a really strong effect, right? These cards were not designed for premium, and in premium, it boosts the power to a level that is incredible. So if you're going first, you go into your history collection stride, you flip 2, cool, no worries. But then you add 4 G Guardians straight up during your opponent's first stride, and then your power bump goes from plus 10k to plus 35k. Like, that's ridiculous, right? There are G-Guards that flip themselves, so the more G-Zone cards that are face up, it means that it accelerates the power too quickly, which means that the format is really quick and very advantageous for anyone who is going first. So the 2 criteria that the Crest grade 1s fall under are, it will affect the future development of cards, as well as it creates a very unfun experience for anyone who's going second or anyone who misses Crest. And as you know, we can kind of see already, why would you never play a deck that does not have a Crest grade 1? Sure, there's like Neo Nectar, there's Katrina at the moment, there's Victor at the moment, but like the power scaling on Crest grade 1s are just so strong that even after the first stride, like its survivability and its offense is just through the roof that it doesn't even matter. And if you go second, your opponent goes first, gets your Crest, you go second and you miss your Crest, you just immediately lose. Like, one of the examples that Solomon made was that Baloral from Great Nature is a card that gives plus 4k to the front row for each face-up G-Zone, and that is an effect on a stride. Like, imagine having a Crest grade 1 that gives you a Crest that has that effect on top of the effect of another stride. Like, that's just ridiculous. And I think these cards limit the designs of future cards because, you know, you're playing 4 ride fixes, 4 grade 1s, and then essentially you're just running like another grade 3, like a themed grade 3. You know, you're playing Harry, you're playing Night Rose, you're playing, you know, in the future, Victor Crest. Why would you ever play any other deck, right? These cards need to go. Like, as a Pale Moon player, as someone who loves Pale Moon is absolutely busted at the moment, but it's not how you're supposed to be playing Pale Moon, and it's actually one of my most disliked decks. One of the other decks I really disliked previously was the Songster Loop, and those 2 decks are absolutely busted through the roof. So the skill expressions on these decks are just not there. These grade 1s are just so high power scaling that it becomes super lopsided for anyone who gets Crest and then the other person who doesn't get Crest. So these cards, or the Crests alone, need to go. And this is going to save premium in the future as well, because this won't be the last time we will get Stride deck sets. There will be probably ones for like Big Belly, there'll be probably ones for like Asha, Dragonic Blade Master. There'll be ones for Victor, and when Victor comes out, God, man, like, you stride busted, you flip 7 strides face up, like, it's over, right? Plus 35k on first stride to your front row, like that's busted. So these grade ones, get them out of here, and I think premium will be in a very, very good place. Then following on from that, there's actually a few other things that we're going to hit. So this card, Shackle, Fetter, Gelgja. This card has been like a menace ever since its release. The very first time that it made a big impact was the Wiseman loop, right? Those who played that deck ages ago was Wiseman could essentially get a bunch of power, attack a bunch of times, and it was just unguardable, essentially. Secondly, this card was also used in Fenrir loop, in the Big Six meta, and Taro was one of the cards that got banned in that card restriction too. And now it becomes an infinite loop again with Yggdrasil, Ordain Owl, and essentially you go into Amaruta, pop a bunch of crits and a red OT, and it becomes infinite power. Like previously, infinite loops got banned instantly. You know, now this should get banned, right? This has been in 3 infinite loops or 3 loops of some kind, and it hasn't been banned. Get rid of it. I wouldn't even put it to 1 because later on there'll be like a card that absolutely breaks this card, and this card will be a threat again. So let's just get rid of Gelgja. You know, it lengthens time needed for a game because, you know, your opponent's just sitting there and you're doing a loop. Oh, yep, I'm getting to infinite power 30 minutes later, and, you know, the round's finished. And then it also, you know, creates a really unfun experience. How are you going to guard infinite power with only 4 Sentinels in your deck? And let's just say, you know, you put a Bracing Angel ladder, you can't even touch the rear guard that gets infinite power. Like, this card has to go. Like, that's just the end of the story. And, you know, it just feels bad. Like, I'm just gonna sit there, you know, twiddle my thumbs for like 15 minutes while my opponent loops me out of the game and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't even like max see it or like Ash Blossom it. Like, I can't do anything. Like, this card is ridiculous. So, you know, you're hitting the Crest, hit this as well. Get rid of Gelgja. The next card to hit is Dreaming Dragon, and Dreaming Dragon was a very vital piece in the 2024 World Champions deck. So Cormac used Fenrir Control, which is essentially like a milling deck, so to say, or a deck out deck. And this card essentially enables the Genesis player to play a long game while your opponent just gets milled out and they have no way to refresh their deck. So this falls under 2 criteria. It creates long games and it becomes a really unfun experience. So it enables games that deck out opponents and those games go for too long, and it creates an indefinite finish to a game if this card keeps getting recycled. Yeah, the deck just keeps staying healthy, stays high, and your opponent can't do anything. There are very limited cards in the card pool at the moment that allows for a deck refresh. This is not Weiss, by the way. And, you know, people playing against this deck, you know, you just sit there, you know, you're playing a really good Victor deck, and yeah, your opponent just drops a Melissa, mills out your deck, and you're on 2 deck, your opponent's on 1, but they refresh their deck. I got you now, I'm gonna get back to 20 deck, and you just deck out. It's unfortunate, isn't it? And this card is actually, you know, really impactful to the tournament integrity of a particular event. And that's because, like, this card and the cards that are incorporated in the deck that uses this card essentially puts a lot of players and a lot of matches into the double loss territory, which means that there's a lot of like unsportsmanlike conduct where, you know, people are like, no, I'm going to take a double loss. I don't want to give you the win. I'm going to take a double loss. So you're creating a very toxic environment where double losses are increased and no actual winner comes about. Yeah, especially when tournaments at level 3 are, you know, strictly enforced. Time is time, that is it, double loss everybody, away we go. So this card in itself is very, very damaging to the premium environment because of the time complexities, right? So let's get rid of it. You know, it means that Genesis has to play a little bit differently, which is completely fine. I mean, you're nuking a loop deck, you're nuking a endless, you know, undeckable, unmillable deck, and you just Dreaming Dragon to refresh everything, yeah? So that's that. And then the last card to ban is Witch of Frogs Melissa for Genesis. So it lengthens games again, and it becomes really unfun. And as I explained before, it's used in a deck where, you know, you set up a beautiful board, you know, I'm gonna finish my opponent, nope, I'm gonna use Fenrir. Fenrir calls the lion thing, the lion calls this, and then I just replace all of your rear guards and I mill you out. Like, that is not how Vanguard should be played. And, you know, again, it promotes a very unhealthy environment where decks go to time. And when you go to time, it's a double loss during Swiss. So ultimately, your tournament integrity just gets damaged because there's so many double losses. And, you know, not a lot of people play this deck because of that. So imagine if you got like a 45-minute timer, people will be playing this deck, like getting towards 45 minutes. And 45 minutes of me sitting there not doing anything and not being able to play the game I'm supposed to play just feels really bad. So let's get rid of Melissa as well. It means that all these toxic decks just get out of the format so we can play Vanguard back to the way it was. And then the last card for phase 1 of my restrictions is Guilty Empress Darkface Gredora. And this card was previously hit in the previous restriction. So why are we hitting this card again? And essentially, over the last 2 to 3 months, Gredora is actually the most topping deck in the premium format. And it's not surprising because Gredora itself is a insane floodgate card that essentially removes the ability to be able to run any other deck's mechanics. You can't call from Soul, you can't call from Drop Zone, you can't call from deck, you can only call from hand. And it also removes a premium only mechanic in G Guardians. You can't even G Guard. And with not being able to call G Guard, you don't have defensive mechanics, and then this deck has Persona Ride, has Malik Mantis, has all these power gains or reduction of power that just makes their 5 attacks really, really strong, and you can't really guard them. So in the whole scheme of things, like if you put all these together, why would you not play Gredora like ever, right? Why would you play Gredora? Why would, actually, we'll put it this way. Why would you play Granblue? Why would you play Pale Moon in a format that is completely infested by Gredora? It reduces the variety of clans and nations, or clans in particular, that are used in premium tournaments, and it becomes really unfun. Like, I can't play my deck, I can't G-Guard, and G-Guardian is like such an important mechanic that is only available in premium. Yeah, so this card, back to 1, I think back to 1 is fine. Well, down to 1 more so. And I think it makes that Mega Colony players need to play a bit more strategic with this card. Play this more like a second stride card or a third stride card, or, you know, if you're going second, maybe you want to lock down your opponent for a turn so that you can get the tempo back. So it becomes like a tempo shifter card more so. And that's fine, you know, it's like a divine skill. You get to use that card once, lock your opponent out, and then, you know, you have to play in a different way to essentially get the game back. So I think Darkface Gredora 2 is too much, because a lot of the time you finish the game on 2, and with the power of Mythiarch and its restanders and Persona and Malik Mantis, there's just compounding effects that just makes attacks really, really strong. So shoot Darkface Gredora down to 1 and we'll be in a good environment. Now, what happens when we ban everything in phase 1? So we get to phase 2, and phase 2 is like your preemptive hits or your complementary hits to phase 1. And this, I feel, in my opinion, does not need to happen straight away. And this is because if we ban everything in phase 1, we essentially go back to the format that we had last Worlds, except with addition of new standard cards. So take this with a grain of salt. I know that, you know, we can look at the premium metagame after the first phase, and I think after the first phase, then we can start to make some of the hits explained in this section, and we'll just kind of monitor how the premium environment kind of builds up. Yeah. So let's start off. What would we hit if, you know, all of the phase 1 hits got taken into effect? We got to think about it first, right? We got to think, what are the best decks afterwards? So the best decks afterwards are Night Rose. You know, Night Rose was one of the best decks in the format, if not the best deck in the format last Worlds. Same with Katrina. Katrina was a powerhouse, yeah? There are other decks like Victor. Nuba was a pretty good deck. Sure, you know, it had Crest, but I think with the restanders in Furai and Seikai, I think the deck is really, really strong. A new deck that actually evolved or came about was Angel Gyze when I played it in Singapore. Joshua Lee also played it in Malaysia, and it's a deck that, you know, just came out of the waters, and it was never seen out last year's World because we got access to a V promo, and there are a lot of new cards that came out. And then stuff like Hellheart 8, Dialiner, Highlander as well. These decks are still very, very good. So what are we hitting, right? These are probably the top 5 decks to hit, kind of. So let's talk about it. Mizukaze. Mizukaze is insane. Like, let's be real, a turn-wide guard restrict where you essentially restrict the grades that your opponent can call. That is ridiculous. So it promotes a very unfun experience, and it will definitely affect the development of future cards. Why would you ever release like a power restander with this guy? It's just not possible. You pretty much give like Furai 2.0 with a 15k buff, your opponent's not being able to guard like when you drop a Mizukaze. So in future development, you always have to think about Mizukaze, right? Well, what if this card was banned? You wouldn't need to think about it anymore. And along with Shunui Rine and the new restanders, the whole turn essentially becomes unguardable. So your opponent calls, you know, 2 grade zeros, suddenly all of their grade zeros can't be guarded, and then you have 5 attacks after the 2 dominates as well. It becomes really restrictive and practically unguardable for that turn. And Rine gives it a crit as well. And Rine has been a really strong stride. I think it is one of the strongest strides that, you know, Premium has ever seen. But with this as well, it becomes really, really unfair. And like I said before, you know, development of cards around this card is just really, really hard. So if you get rid of Mizukaze, you don't have a degenerate guard restrict, turn-wide guard restrict card. And then, you know, the future development of cards becomes really, really good, right? And this is not going to be the last time we'll see, you know, Shunui stride deck set support, because they've released new strides for Messiah and Jet, and we will probably see new strides for Shunui, new grade 2s for Shunui as well in the future. So yeah, ban Mizukaze. I think everyone would welcome that, and yeah, moving on. So the next thing is Night Rose. This one was really hard, and I think I spoke to a couple Granblue players who really know the deck and really know the plan, and this is probably the best choice restrict. And I know that people are saying, you know, ban Beatrice, ban this, ban that. I think if you give the choice to the player, then, you know, at least then they can kind of cook with their deck in simple terms, right? So at the moment, you know, if we hit everything in phase 1, Night Rose is probably going to be the best deck in the format. So giving Granblue the choice of whether they want attack extension or the capabilities to retire in Negro Lily, you get one or the other, but just not both. And attack extension means like you go into Bartolomeo, you call this calls something else at a very low cost, and essentially, you know, you can multi-attack on the guard restrict. Sure. Alternatively, you can go Negro Lily. And Negro Lily, you now have to play 2016 Granblue, where you have a rear guard that you want to retire it, use Night Rose's skill for GB2, mill and call it back to get the effects. So it's like it's a nice way to, I guess, bump on either side, right? Offensively or defensively, because at the moment, both offense and defense with this deck is just absolutely insane. So if we hit this, at least it taps it on one end and, you know, still has the other, but it drops one way or another. So I feel, you know, this is probably one of the ways to go. There's probably other different combinations that you could probably think about. People are saying, you know, if you ban Beatrice, then Granblue becomes like Turbo Bartolomeo with Skeleton Navigator, but you know, we can reassess that after 3 months. So yeah, that is the Granblue hit. Then we have Katrina. So there's a lot of things around Katrina. Katrina is pretty much a tanky, unkillable deck, and that is because it gets free PGs left, right, and center. And with free PGs, it drags the game on really, really long, and it becomes like endless. Yeah. So giving Neo Nectar either one or the other, just like we did with Granblue, will kind of pick and choose what they really want for the deck. So if they choose to opt to use Green Katrina, then that means that they have good offense, but that means that their Sentinels probably has to be draw Sentinels or something like that. Sure, they might use like countercharge PGs or whatever, and then max out on the crits, then that's fine, but at least you don't get the defensive capabilities that Gelgja gives. And then on the opposite side, if you choose Gelgja, then you don't have Green Katrina, you don't have an offensive power engine, then you have to play a bit more control based with Neo Nectar. And I think this hit is great, and it is a hit that I actually proposed in my last ban list, and I feel like this is what would put Katrina down a level so that it aligns with everything else. Sure, you can still play Honolese, all of the good stuff, you just don't get recurrable PGs. Then Enlargulv, this card is crazy, so it actually falls under two categories for this one. So it reduces the variety of clans and nations used in tournaments, as well as it affects the development of future cards. So why would you play anything but green decks, right? And when you're designing cards as Bushiroad, you always have to keep in mind what grade 2 or greater cards you release, because this card is going to absolutely abuse it. So by hitting this means that you're actually tapping Night Rose and Katrina as well. These decks no longer have a way to get back grade 3 heals, to have access to G Guardians, as well as they can't just get back grade 3s for like Ultimate Stride. So Solemn made a pretty good point. If you are striding first into Big Obadiah, I think King Obadiah, Big Obadiah, the one that like mills 5, essentially is really weak if you go second, because you only call 2. But if you mill Forbidol and Enlargulv gets back the Forbidol then calls Nightstorm and Skull Dragon, then you have a really good setup turn. But without this, then Night Rose doesn't have a really good first stride going into Obadiah. Then if you're talking about Katrina, they can no longer forcibly get their grade 3 heals. They can't just like call grade 3 heal, overplace it with a token, and then use Enlargulv to get it back. They have to like draw it and like, get it manually. And I think one of the big important things is that green decks can play super defensive in the early game, knowing that they'll be able to get their heals back. So like, for example, Gredora, you can heal guard first and then use the Gredora attack to call Enlargulv, and then Enlargulv gets the heal back. So by restricting this, you don't have that capability anymore. Sure, it's not only limited to just these 3 decks, but these 3 decks are kind of like the decks that predominantly are in the format at the moment. And then, like I said, future grade 2s or greater cards that you release, maybe you release a grade 3 crit later on, or maybe you release, a grade 2 trigger or something, or grade 2 null, then you don't have to worry about Enlargulv getting it back. Enlargulv is essentially Greed Shade Light, which is one of Granblue's best cards ever released, and you're giving it to every single green clan. That's pretty busted. So I think if you hit this, you hit the defensive capabilities of all of the big green decks at the moment, so Night Rose, Katrina, and Gredora, and it puts them down into alignment again. Then people are like, oh, if you hit everything else, then, Angel Gyze becomes a really good deck. Yeah, I agree. And I think, Neon Gyze with the overtrigger is really strong, because some overtriggers allow you to flip multiple Xerath Dragons. For example, the purple one, right? It replaced the power increase to flipping a Xerath Dragon, but because you get to call 1 and you increase the power there on the additional effect, you actually flip 2. So by removing the overtrigger from Neon Gyze, 1, Neon Gyze and Gyze decks in general do not get an extra heal. They don't get a 5th heal, that's pretty big. They also don't get 50k shield in shield value, that's also big. And they don't have an acceleration on the G-Zone effect, or the bind effect of the Xerath Dragons, that's also big. So you start hitting 3 layers on Gyze, and it puts it down a little bit, makes the deck a little bit slower so that it can cope a little bit better. Then, once we're kind of all together, this is pretty much what we'll be hitting ultimately, right? So all of the Crest grade ones need to go. Every single one of them, not just the big three. Crest Jet needs to go, Crest Messiah needs to go, the Crest need to go. Gelgja needs to go, unfair card since like the dawn of time, Dreaming Dragon as well, and Melissa. Those are the big four that really need to go and needs to be before this Worlds. Then you can think about Mizukaze and Enlargulv, and I think Enlargulv might be like the first one of the lot because it hits the 3 big decks down a tier so that they don't have insane defensive capabilities. Then restricted to 1, Darkface Gredora. We've seen it all, you know, the most topping deck in the last 2 to 3 months. Let's just hit it, you know. 1 Gredora, I think the deck is still really strong. You just have to go into like Overwhelm first, into Darkface Gredora, and not just straight into Gredora, and then you just win, right? And with, you know, power spikes of D cards, I think Overwhelm into Gredora is completely fine because then it slows down the tempo of a lot of premium decks. Mo Flash to 1 must happen so that, you know, if I'm watching the standard stream, I don't want to get, you know, absolutely high rolled against Enlargulv. Just get rid of it, you know, put it down to 1. Then we have, you know, really skill-based decks like Sagra, Leverdress, Messiah, a lot of like these new decks that are really strong. And then ultimately you can look at, you know, choice restricting Negro Lily and Beatrice, Green Katrina and Lilga, and then Neon Gyze and the Overtrigger as well. But you know, ultimately one thing that is not on this ban list is ban the Overtrigger. I think the Overtrigger is ridiculous, and I think the whole world has said it now. You know, keep Overtriggers in standard, that's fine. Let premium have no Overtriggers, that'd be awesome, right? But yeah, you know, we've been asking for that for years and we haven't had it. So I'm not gonna push my luck. So yeah, that's pretty much my opinions on what should be hit for premium and standard come Worlds 2025 in 2 months. And I think with these hits, it will make the formats very, very fun. And, you know, for the ones viewing it and watching it at home, it will be great for the viewership too. So yeah, if you guys like this video, pop a like, comment down below what you guys think of all the hits. If you guys haven't already, click that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.